All right, I'll try and make this brief because I know it's going to take some time. So, if anyone's watching, you'll see me testing just to make sure I can be heard. Okay. But I'm going to go through two things real quick because I think it needs to be expressed. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt are very difficult things you wouldn't normally do. I'm going to make one minor change and then get started. All right, so I'm going to show a clip. I'm going to stop it in between um, just for a little commentary. This is from Band of Brothers. I think it's first season was only one season, eighth episode, and it goes into their storming of a small town in Foy, and they're trying to basically beat back the Germans. It's very simple. They're given an assignment. They have their troops, and they need to take the base. Let's see if this works. If you can hear it, let me know. Say, this person's using copyright material without changing it. But the greater purpose of this is to show you that you can get clear instructions. You need to follow them, right? Why? Because you have an objective to obtain. How are you going to do that? You're just given instructions on how. Let's continue. Look at that. Couldn't follow instructions. You're supposed to go in there. You're supposed to let the other guys be the distraction. They can't follow instructions. Move forward. Go. Now he's trying to find cover. Okay. That's a good way to solve this problem. That shouldn't be there because you should have followed the initial instructions. It's very simple stuff. Did you see that? One said fall back. The superior officer said go forward. This guy's confused. This is a big problem. He got orders. He's supposed to be following. He could be doing a lot better now, but he's still afraid. He doesn't know what he's supposed to be doing, except for he's already been told what to do. So this guy's afraid. He's uncertain. He is doubting everything that he was told, and he's doubting what he was supposed to do. And so he's going with an alternative plan, which he thinks will be a little more secure. Go around, sneak up behind them, except for the fact that you know that there's somebody here. You, right? At this point, you have nothing to do except for try and recover what you already did, which I think he thinks he's doing that, but he's leaving his men into more danger. So he abandoned the initial orders, initial plot, initial purpose for what he thinks could be a suitable replacement. Why did he do that? He's afraid. And there's a good reason to be afraid. There's bullets whizzing by. Anybody would be afraid. Fear is a thing that you always have to encounter. But how do you encounter it? How do you keep moving forward? That's the answer. That's the question that needs an answer.
We will provide suppressing fire. We're gonna be kind of a
Wait, he should have been out there, right? He should have been moving forward. You see that look on his face? That was fear. That was unbridled fear. That's what happens when you don't follow instructions. You don't know how to do it. You're supposed to go through the mission and accomplish. And this is over dramatic, but it's supposed to point to a bigger purpose, right? How do you conquer your fear? He wanted to lead it himself. He's too high ranking to do that. His general or director told him, look, you're a supervisory, you're managerial now. You have to guide these people. You can't be out there doing their work for them, right? So he sent in a trusted lieutenant, lead it like we need it. Go in, storm them, take care of business. It's simple, but how do you do that when you're afraid? A lot of times you have to push past it. Look at that. Look at that face. He's frozen. This is a trained man too. Officer school, granted, but he's still trained. This is supposed to be a person who's supposed to lead, right? And you're supposed to lead yourself. You're supposed to lead your team. You're supposed to do whatever you can, whenever you can. And a lot of it, fear, uncertainty, doubt, right? He was afraid of the whole scenario. He was uncertain about how to proceed. He doubted his supervisor's plan. And now he wanted to come up with an alternative. Doesn't look like it's working. So someone else is relieving him of duty. This is how it happens sometimes. Boom. That's confidence inspiring right there, right? These guys knew what they were supposed to do. They did part of it. They did put down suppressing fire on that steeple or until the roof where the caved in roof was, and they did suppress some of the fire. That is great. This man came in, said, "Look, we're going to go back to the original plan. Put down that. We'll take that part of it. Now we're going to go back in. We're going to storm in." Okay. Looks like they closed ground. Looks like they got in there, they got them on their back feet, and they've done what they were supposed to do initially. Because one person pushed past their fear, pushed past the uncertainty, knew what they had to do, bend out themselves or the plan that their supervisor. That's one thing that they did, right? That's one way you can actually get the job done. And a lot of that takes certain kind of bravery most people don't have. Um, and sometimes it's just out of your control, right? But you had a mission. You're meant to accomplish it. You can't be afraid of the things that might happen because they will very likely happen. But I'm going to do part two to this, right? Because that's an example of something that really you don't know if it's in your control or not. And sometimes things will be outside of your control. So I'll give you a second story that is, but maybe a little more relatable. All right. So the person you see here, I think you should see them here. This is Captain Ed Dwight. All right. And I will provide you a little bit of background on him. All right. You could look up his Wikipedia page. He's still alive. He's I think 91 years old. All right. Let's go into this. One white, one Asian, one Negro. That was the vision. John F. Kennedy imagined a future where American rockets carrying three astronauts from different backgrounds would travel to the moon. It'd be a symbol, proof that America's melting pot could reach for the stars. White, black, Asian, all represented among the first humans to set foot on another world. It was a distant possibility and a dream, but yet Kennedy, in the early part of his administration, set out to make it real. And so they sought out a black pilot for astronaut training, someone who met the same elite military, academic, and physical criteria as the white candidates. But in the early 1960s, black pilots were rare. Some had flight hours, some had the academics, some had the physicality. But this was a system that didn't want them in the air. One person actually did meet all this, and he came along with a cohort of others. That was Ed Dwight. Ed Dwight was from a small rural black area just outside of Kansas City. And he was interested in flying from the first time he saw the biplanes in his town. And it would usually be men coming back from hunting trips carrying bloody meat, um, pop bottles, beer bottles. And he would offer to clean up for him just to learn a little bit about it. Ed was good with academia, he was good with art, and he enjoyed airplanes. And he studied, right? He loved his art, he loved his airplanes, he loved his education. And he spent days drawing, but his real passion and fascination was with flight, right? So Ed came from a family where his mother was a civil rights leader and I believe an educator, and his father was a player for the Kansas City Monarchs. I think that's right. Negro League team from the time. And so when his dad was away, his mother would take him down to the airstrip to watch the planes, kind of occupy some time. When he was about 8 and 9 years old, one of the men coming back from one of the hunting trips took him up for a flight, and that changed everything. And he was hooked, right? From that young, he spent hours in the library. He would use his artistry to sketch fighter planes. He would also make model airplanes, and he would study aviation manuals. He would learn about the math, the physics, well beyond his grade level. And he didn't just dream of flying, he trained for it. That same man who brought him up actually taught him how to fly. And he wound up getting flight hours at a time where, again, not many Negroes had flight hours. One morning, when he was delivering newspaper, he saw a front page story in the Kansas City Hall, which was a Negro paper at the time, and showed a black fighter pilot, Dayton Raglan, who's standing on the wing of a jet, because they used to do that back then, stand on jets to fly around, uh, jump horses off of large diving boards that, before the internet and cable TV, people did a lot of interesting stuff. But seeing that picture of Raglan changed his whole perception. And so he applied for Air Force pilot training and he got in. And the Air Force didn't make it easy. You know, they looked at him as a short guy. He barely met the regulations for size. I think he was about 5'4", 5'6", somewhere around that. They doubted his ability, but he aced the exams. And they thought he was a boy genius, but he actually memorized all those aviation manuals that he was studying since he was a child, since his passion for flight was there. And so the tests were second nature. And so these tests that would be scheduled for 2, 3 hours, he'd wind up finishing in 30 minutes just because he knew the book. backwards and forward. So by the 1960s, early to mid 1960s, he was doing well in the Air Force. He flew 5 different aircraft. He was sent to different training schools, and he was fast tracked for leadership. I think by the time he got captain, they'd already put him in for major. And one of his superiors told him he was pretty much going to be a general, which, if you know African American history and the military, there's been a lot of well, it's been a good number of black Air Force generals. So one day he got an unexpected letter that came from the White House, and it was an invitation to become the first black astronaut. So at this time, there were 7 Mercury astronauts who had already gone into space, or they were being chosen to go into space. They were all white men. These would be marketed as America's heroes, right? And Dwight knew, and Kennedy knew, and those astronauts knew that these people who would do this would be legends. They would be made sculptures, they would be in history books. And, he had also known the history of the military. The Tuskegee Airmen, it took them so long to get in the air for them to do so well. He knew about the Panthers who, took their tanks around North Africa, Central, Western Europe. Um, and he knew that NASA wasn't likely to break tradition, that there would be BS along the way. His commander told him to rip up the letter. They said, "Hey, you could be a general. Why not stick with the path that you're on here? You have a promising future. Why risk it?" But his mother convinced him, and he went and said, "I want to do this." So the commander called him crazy. He said, "You know what? If I can do this, I can set a great example." And he stepped into history, right? From the moment he accepted the option or the opportunity, he became a public figure. He was in Ebony, he was in Jet, he was on national newspapers and the mainstream media. Magazines put them on his cover. He received fan mail, hate mail, even marriage proposals, even though he was already married. And I believe at the time he had a daughter. But inside NASA, it was a different story. He was training over at Edwards Air Force Base, and the astronaut trainees, they were being pushed to their limits. They were flying the top of the line experimental aircraft that you could find on this planet. And according to Dwight, Chuck Yeager said President Kennedy is trying to cram an N-word down our throats. Yeager told all the trainees, all the flight instructors, everyone in his class, if Dwight passed, you'll lose your jobs. Don't talk to him. Don't drink with him. Don't have him over to your house. Don't give him instructions on this. And so for months, he was frozen out. No instruction, no support, just silence. And the White House kept intervening. So officials checked in, tried to assure he was given a fair shot, and it only made things worse. Some resented him more, believing he was a token, unqualified. Others began to see he was more than just Kennedy's project, that he was serious. And so the rumor spread, Dwight's going to NASA. And for a moment, he did believe it. But then everything changed. November 22nd, 1963. He was in a mission simulator outside Seattle, pretending to fly to the moon, when he heard the news. Kennedy had been shot. By Monday, Dwight was reassigned. Orders came down, sending him to Germany to be the U.S. liaison for the German space program. Except Germany didn't have a space program. So Dwight, being an astronaut in training, borrowed a jet, which apparently they could do. He flew across the country, which apparently you could do. And he went straight to the White House and met with Ted Kennedy just days after the assassination. Ted told him, "There's nothing we can do now." And that was that. So Dwight was passed over for astronaut training. In 1966, he resigned from the Air Force. And there was an article, and I'll put this in the description, and it went over his struggles: discrimination, harassment, housing discrimination. A brick was thrown through his window, and its glass rained down over his daughter's head. His family went through a lot of BS. His wife divorced him, and he tried to fight back. He called out the racism. That Ebony article did point to all these colluding factors that did point out how this government agency worked with that one to deny someone who seemed to be rightly qualified. NASA, the government, the military, all denied it, even though there was evidence suggesting it. And so the dream of Dwight, first black astronaut, ended before he even left the ground. So what do you do if you're this close to the moon? Ed turned to his first love, art. By 1974, he was producing pieces, full time. He became a person who had met, I believe it was the first black lieutenant governor of Colorado. And these two seeing something of a kinship amongst each other. Um, he asked Dwight to produce him a couple of pieces. And at the same time, he wanted to produce several I believe, a work of art for downtown Denver, commemorating the first Black lieutenant governor and some of the African American history in this country, right? And he did. And he produced more work and more work. And I believe at this point, he has about 130 sculptures produced and showcasing African American history throughout the country. You've seen some of it if you lived in certain areas. This will be figures like Rosa Parks, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, and they'll be on countless Capitol grounds, universities, public parks, and even today in his 90s, he's still working. One of his largest pieces is in the Texas Capitol building, and it shows 500 years of Black history in Texas, starting from one of the first explorers to come over with one of the first Africans to come over with a Spanish explorer in the 1500s. And then something interesting happened. And I'll show you some of his work. Right. This is his website. You can see some of the memorials, right? The Texas Memorial, John Hope Franklin Memorial, South Carolina African American History Memorial. We can go a little bit closer on them, right? That's impressive, isn't it? John Hope Franklin Memorial Park, the historian. I think he was at Duke University for like 30, 40 years. South African American History Memorial shows the African presence from 1600s to the present. The Underground Railroad Memorial in Detroit, Michigan. Virginia Union Memorial, Richmond, Virginia. Soldiers Memorial in Lincoln University. The Mother of Africa Chapel, Washington, D.C. I've seen this one a bunch of times. It is great to see up close. And one of countless Martin Luther King Jr. memorials. All right. And one of my favorites, you'll see this in the Denver airport. All right. It's a little small, but let's see if we can scale in. Squeeze that in there. No, I don't gotta squeeze in. There we go. There we go. That's one of my favorite ones there. All right. But 2024, I think it was February 2024, at the age of 90, he became the oldest man in space. And though he wasn't the first black astronaut, I think the Russians with a Cuban gentleman accomplished that about 60 years earlier. He finally got to live one of his professional accomplishments, even though he had done a lot more with other professional accomplishments. The point of this is you have two options. You can succumb to fear, you can succumb to outside pressure, or you can try. I guarantee you'll win. You'll win something, right? Whether it's your second love or something you never thought you might get to accomplish, but you actually might. What stops you? Sometimes it's fears, sometimes it's uncertainty, sometimes it's outside forces. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Most of the best people in this world have tried to win in spite of everything. And oftentimes they might not get right where they want when they want, but they'll get close. And you can find him. He's on Facebook, still producing sculptures. And I showed you, obviously, his website. You can find him as well, right? Order a work from him. You might like it. Anyways, that's all I have to say. So I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to stop this, and I will see some of you either in class today or tomorrow. But don't let your fear of, I don't know, failure or something along those lines stop you. You can do a lot. Just stick to your plan. Keep moving.